It all began one ordinary evening, an evening that should have passed without consequence. Yet it didn't. It was a night that would unravel everything I thought I understood about myself, my boundaries, and my desires. My nephew, a young man who had recently moved into our home for college, asked an innocent question: "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" He said he had been feeling uneasy lately, unsettled by strange noises at night. It seemed harmless enough. But oh, how I wish I could have foreseen the chaos it would unleash. I told myself there was no harm in letting him stay. After all, he was family, and families looked out for each other. My husband was working late, as he often did, and I thought nothing of allowing him to rest on the couch in my room. But as the hours wore on, I realized the night wasn't going to be as innocent as I had hoped. At first, it was the way he looked at me. Not like a nephew looking at his aunt, but something else entirely, an intensity in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was my imagination. Yet, as we talked about trivial things, I felt his gaze linger too long, his laugh a little too soft. The tension in the room grew palpable. I told myself to stay composed, not overthink. But then he asked me something unexpected. "Auntie," he began, his voice low, "have you ever regretted settling down so soon?" His question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask that?" I replied, trying to mask my surprise. He shrugged, though his eyes betrayed him. "I don't know. You're so beautiful, so full of life. I just wondered if you ever think about, I don't know, different choices." My heart skipped a beat. Was I reading too much into this, or was he deliberately trying to stir something within me? I laughed nervously, brushing off his question, but the air between us was charged with an undeniable energy. I told him it was late, and he should get some sleep. But instead of lying down on the couch, he moved closer to where I was sitting. His presence felt magnetic and overwhelming. "You don't have to be alone, you know," he said softly, almost a whisper. "You deserve to feel alive again." His words struck a nerve I didn't know was exposed. I had buried so much over the years: the loneliness, the unspoken desires, the quiet resentment of a life that had become monotonous. And now here was someone seeing through the facade, daring to say the things I'd never admitted to myself. I told him to stop, that this wasn't appropriate, but my voice lacked conviction and I knew he could sense it. He apologized, backing off slightly, but the damage had been done. The words lingered in the air, haunting me even as he turned away. I lay awake for hours, my mind racing, my husband's absence, the tension in the room, and the unspoken emotions swirling inside me created a storm I couldn't escape. And then, as if sensing my turmoil, he spoke again. "Auntie, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice gentle, "but I feel like you deserve to hear that you're more than just someone's wife. You're incredible." I wanted to dismiss him, to tell him he was being foolish, but the sincerity in his voice broke down my defenses. Against my better judgment, I turned to face him. "Why are you saying all this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because it's true," he replied simply, "and maybe no one else has had the courage to tell you." His words were a catalyst, igniting something within me that I couldn't contain. I knew it was wrong, knew I was walking a dangerous line, but the way he looked at me, with admiration, with longing, was something I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know who leaned in first, but suddenly we were too close. My heart pounded as I wrestled with the voices in my head screaming at me to stop. But the pull was too strong, the moment too intoxicating. He stopped just before our lips met, his breath warm against my skin. "If you tell me to go, I will," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but I couldn't say it. I couldn't tell him to leave. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, my thoughts a chaotic mess. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of my shallow breaths. I should have told him to leave. I should have ended it right there, but instead, I sat frozen, unable to move, unable to think clearly. He pulled back slightly, searching my face for a reaction, for any sign that he'd crossed a line too far. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't ashamed. He was unapologetically drawn to me in a way I hadn't been prepared for. And what terrified me the most was how much I wanted to feel that pull, that gravity, that attention. When I finally spoke, my voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. "You should go to bed." He smiled faintly, as though he'd expected that response but wasn't entirely deterred by it. "Of course," he said, his voice calm, measured. "Good night, Auntie." But as he turned to lie down, the air between us was still thick with everything unspoken, every lingering look, every word that hadn't been said. I lay awake long after he'd fallen asleep, the quiet rhythm of his breathing the only sound in the room. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to answer. Was I imagining things? Had I overreacted? Or had something irreversible truly begun tonight? Morning came too quickly, and with it, the awkwardness of facing him in the daylight. He was polite, respectful, as though nothing had happened, but his eyes, those piercing, knowing eyes, told a different story. The days that followed were a test of endurance. I avoided being alone with him as much as possible, but it seemed like fate had other plans. Every stolen glance, every accidental touch, every moment we shared in passing felt charged with an energy I couldn't deny. And worse, I couldn't help but notice how it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. Then came the night that changed everything. My husband was out of town for work, and the house felt emptier than usual. I told myself I was being paranoid, that nothing would happen. But when he knocked on my bedroom door again, my resolve crumbled. "I just wanted to check on you," he said softly, standing in the doorway. "You seemed upset earlier." "I'm fine," I replied, though my voice betrayed me. He hesitated, then stepped inside. "Are you sure?" His concern felt genuine, and for a moment I let myself believe that was all it was. But as he sat down across from me, the tension in the room became impossible to ignore. We talked at first about mundane things, his classes, his friends, the weather. But the conversation soon drifted to more personal topics. He asked about my life, my dreams, my regrets. And before I knew it, I was pouring my heart out to him in a way I hadn't with anyone in years. "I don't know how it happened," I admitted, my voice breaking. I feel like I've lost myself, like I'm not the person I used to be." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You're still that person," he said firmly. "You're incredible. You're just stuck. And maybe you need someone to remind you of that." His words hit me like a tidal wave. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also seen in a way I hadn't been in so long. I tried to brush it off, to laugh and change the subject, but he wouldn't let me. "You deserve to be happy," he said quietly. "You deserve to feel alive." Something in me snapped. I stood abruptly, pacing the room in an attempt to escape the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "This is ridiculous," I muttered. "You're my nephew. This is wrong," he finished for me, standing as well. "Maybe it is, but that doesn't make it any less real." I turned to face him, anger and confusion warring within me. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly," he said, his voice steady. "I see you, Auntie. I see the woman you tried to bury under all these expectations and responsibilities, and I know you see it too." His words were a mirror, reflecting truths I wasn't ready to confront. I felt tears prick my eyes as I struggled to find the right thing to say, to put an end to this madness. But instead, I stood there frozen as he closed the distance between us. He was so close now, his presence overwhelming. My breath quickened and my heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to push him away, to scream at him to leave, but I couldn't. There was a strange pull, an undeniable force that kept me rooted in place, paralyzed by a mix of fear and something I couldn't name. "Auntie," his voice was barely a whisper, the air between us thick with tension. "I'm not asking you to change everything. I'm just saying, you deserve more. You deserve to feel something again." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the rush of emotions flooding my mind. But his words clung to me, each syllable piercing through my defenses. I wanted to tell him to stop, to tell him it was wrong, because it was. But somewhere deep inside, I knew I didn't want him to stop. The thought both terrified and excited me. Before I could gather my thoughts, he reached out. His hand brushed against mine, sending a jolt of electricity through my body. The simple touch felt like an explosion, igniting something deep inside me that I had long since buried. "Auntie," he murmured again, his voice thick with emotion. "It's okay to feel. It's okay to want something different, something real." I swallowed hard, my mind a chaotic whirl of thoughts and emotions. He was right. I had spent so many years burying my desires, pretending that everything was fine, that I was content. But I wasn't. I hadn't been for a long time. I stepped back, trying to regain some sense of control. "We can't do this," I said, my voice trembling. This isn't what I want." But even as I spoke, a part of me knew I was lying. He didn't back away. Instead, he took another step toward me, his eyes locked onto mine, unwavering. "It's not what you want now," he said, his voice low and intense. "But it's what you need. You just don't know it yet." And then, without warning, his lips were on mine. It was a kiss unlike any I had ever experienced. It was not the soft, hesitant kiss of a first lover, but something far more urgent, far more desperate. His hands were on me now, pulling me closer, urging me to surrender to the moment. My mind screamed at me to stop, to push him away, but my body betrayed me. I kissed him back, my hands threading through his hair, pulling him closer. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like a lifetime and yet, only a heartbeat. But eventually we pulled apart, both of us breathless, our hearts racing in unison. "Auntie," his voice was rough, raw as he looked down at me. "You don't have to fight this. You don't have to be ashamed." I closed my eyes, tears welling up. I didn't know what I felt anymore, confused, guilty, terrified, but also alive. So alive. I had never allowed myself to feel this free, this untethered. And as much as I hated myself for it, I knew I didn't want it to stop. But the reality of what we had done, of what we were about to continue doing, hit me all at once. What if my husband found out? What if my family found out? What would this do to all of us? The weight of the consequences was suffocating. I can't," I whispered, stepping back, my hands shaking. "We can't do this. This is wrong." He didn't move. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching me with those same piercing eyes. And then he spoke. "I know it's wrong. I know it's dangerous, but I also know how you feel. I can see it in your eyes, Auntie. You've been living a lie for so long, and I'm not going to let you keep pretending. Not anymore." His words struck me like a blow, sharp and cold. He was right. He was right in a way that made me sick to my stomach. I had been pretending for so long, pretending that everything was okay, that my life was perfect, that I was happy. But I wasn't, and he saw it. "Auntie," he whispered, his voice soft but insistent. "Let me help you. Let me show you what it feels like to be truly wanted, to be free." And in that moment I made a choice that would forever change everything.